As an American by the name of Matthew Van Dyke, he's 35 years old, lives in Baltimore. He's currently attempting to recruit a Christian army to fight against ISIS in Iraq. And he's done it before in Libya, where he joined rebel forces a few years ago before being captured and spending 6 months in prison there. So who is he? And why is his effort gaining some traction with U.S. veterans and Western evangelicals? And what's behind his rejection of the criticism that raising a Christian army to fight ISIS equates to launching a holy war? For answers to these and more, we turn to Jenna McLaughlin. Jenna is editorial fellow with Mother Jones' Washington Bureau. She recently looked into Van Dyke and his efforts and wrote the article, "This Guy from Baltimore is Raising a Christian Army to Fight ISIS. What Could Go Wrong?" which currently appears on motherjones.com. Jenna joins me from Washington. Who is Matthew Van Dyke, Jenna?
Well, that's an interesting question. He's certainly a multifaceted character and a very interesting one. And that's definitely the reason why I was first interested in his story, just because all of his previous adventures. I actually was working at Baltimore City Paper when one of my colleagues wrote a cover story about Matthew Van Dyke, and that was following his time in Libya as a rebel fighter against the regime of Muammar Gaddafi. And that's how I kind of first found out about him. But during my time at Mother Jones, I've been covering sort of the Middle East and ISIS. And I started seeing stories about Matthew Van Dyke and his most recent mission to form essentially a Christian militia or army to fight ISIS in Iraq, based in Iraq. So I saw a few clips about that, and I noticed that a lot of them had a few different characters in them, but that they weren't really fleshed out, that there weren't very many details about what actually went on at that training camp, and sort of who the people were that got interested in it and why they decided to join on. So that's why I sort of started writing about him.
Is he, what does he do for, is he wealthy? What does he do for a living?
As far as I'm concerned, he previously was a documentary filmmaker and filmed some of his motorcycle adventures in North Africa and across the Middle East. I think he's done a few different things. He went to Georgetown and had a master's degree in security studies. But it seems sort of like he is a jack of all trades and sort of bounces around to different things like that.
So to ask the question from the title of your article, what could go wrong with Van Dyke's effort to raise a Christian army to fight ISIS? What could go wrong?
Well, there are certainly a lot of potential problems that are raised in the piece, and I can kind of go through those. So the article sort of starts out with Matthew Van Dyke's announcement that he had been training an Iraqi Christian army for the past couple months over the winter, and that was sort of the first that anyone heard about it. And essentially, I wanted to investigate that and see what went on there. So essentially, my piece in the beginning sort of points out that by the time that he was on these media interviews, some problems had already arisen with his training camp. Most, if not all, of the trainers had quit by the time these announcements were made. They had resigned their positions. It was unclear whether or not Matthew Van Dyke had actually gained permission from the State Department as required by U.S. citizens in order to train foreign nationals in defense services or military training. And very few details were disclosed to the public about how much money had been raised, where that money had been spent, and sort of what the future plans were. So those were some of the potential areas of interest that I looked into.
Why has the government not told us about him?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. The most answer that I could get from the State Department is that they advise American citizens not to get involved in Iraq. Actually, it's a specific clause in the International Traffic in Arms regulations that defense services, when proposed by U.S. citizens, are to be denied by the State Department unless it is in the interest of U.S. foreign policy, essentially.
So why hasn't he been arrested?
I'm not sure. It's entirely possible that he worked out some sort of agreement with the State Department. He sort of belatedly told me that he had come up with the proper registration requirements. It's unclear whether or not that's true. We asked him multiple times, 2 times, to provide those documents and confirmed with the State Department that he was allowed to share them with us, and he never supplied those to me.
Have you called the State Department?
I have, yes. I've spoken to 3 or 4 different State Department officials.
And what do they say?
They said that they don't speak about specific cases, but said that they'd spoken with the consulate in Erbil and that the consulate in Erbil had conveyed no such information about him being approved to train Iraqi Christians.
The company he founded is called Sons of Liberty International.
Yes.
What is that? What does it do?
Sons of Liberty International, in the way that Matthew Van Dyke describes it, is a nonprofit-based sort of military training company. So it's not actually a nonprofit company, which is a little tricky. It's not a 501c3, it's actually an LLC, but it's supposed to run on essentially a nonprofit model so that these training sort of camps are free to the people that he provides them to, but basically he raises money from U.S. citizens in order to fund those.
Who supports him financially?
Basically, American citizens. I've spoken to a few of them. They believe in what he's doing. They think that he's doing it better than the government can. So just regular, everyday people who, send a couple $100s.
How many people in his army?
There were 350 that were trained in the second program. So yeah, about 350 in that first round.
So frankly, Jenna, why should we care? 350 in an army, he's going to go to Iraq. He's going to fight ISIS with 350 people. It sounds ludicrous.
Well, I'm not sure how we can evaluate that, essentially.
Well,
yeah, 350
ISIS got a lot more than 350. They've got weapons. How can he fight them?
That's true. I'm not sure exactly what his plans were to specifically fight them. I know that he wanted to make sure that the Assyrian people at least had some resources to defend themselves, and I know that he spoke a lot in other media interviews that he wanted to specifically take on ISIS when that battle came to northern Iraq and the Kurdish region where these people are. I'm not sure how well that would work out. That's an interesting question.
How does he recruit people?
Essentially, the force in Iraq, this is a little complicated. It was formed by the Assyrian Democratic Movement, which is a political party in the region for Assyrian Christians. And they essentially kind of gathered all the first recruits. And there were a lot more people interested, but they couldn't train all those people in the first camp. So it wasn't necessarily specifically Matthew Van Dyke that recruited those people, but the political leaders in the region, as well as another nonprofit organization that I speak about in my piece, the American Mesopotamian Organization, which is sort of a grassroots foundation in the U.S. that champions Assyrian causes.
Now, he's not a stranger to media. He made headlines a few years back. He was captured in Libya while fighting to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi. They captured him. They put him in jail in Libya?
Yes.
And what happened to him there? Why didn't they kill him?
That's a good question. I guess you would have to ask Gaddafi's fighters. But he was there for 6 months in solitary confinement and apparently had a lot of time to think and deepen in his faith, is what he said previously. Yeah, he just eventually was able to escape after 6 months with the rest of the prisoners. And
he recruited a number of U.S. military veterans for his effort. What about them? Are they public?
Well, now they are. The first time that they agreed to go public was actually in my article. They decided to put their names on the record. At least 2 of them did. The other 2 did not. One is Michael Cunningham. He was a former Army sergeant, and if anyone has seen Sebastian Junger's film, Restrepo, about fighting in Afghanistan's Korangal Valley, he's in that film, which is a pretty intense movie, and I think everyone should watch it.
Incredible
it's important
story
to be aware of. Yeah.
Jenna is the author of a recent article. This guy from Baltimore is raising a Christian army to fight ISIS. What could go wrong? Thank you, Jenna McLaughlin, editorial fellow with Mother Jones in Washington.
Thanks for having me.